Say it loud. I'm black and I'm proud. Hey y'all, hey, we are back at it again with another hero of the civil rights movement. This one is not so unsung as he has a movie done in his honor starring one of my favorite actors, Mr. Chadwick Boseman. May he rest in peace. And so may Mr. Thurgood Marshall rest in peace as well. Now, let's get to it because there's a lot to talk about when it comes to Mr. Marshall. He was a man of means and power. Thurgood Marshall founded the Legal Defense Fund in 1940, and he served as its director until 1961. He also was the first Black Supreme Court justice, which was confirmed in a vote of 69 to 11 in 1962. So, Mr. Marshall, fellow July baby, was born July 2nd, 1908 in Baltimore, Maryland, to Mr. William Marshall and Mrs. Norma Williams. And they were school teachers. Now, well, the mom was a school teacher. The daddy was a lawyer. We'll get to that. Now, Mr. Marshall graduated from Lincoln University in the 1930s. Oh no, it's backwards. His daddy was not a lawyer. That was his Mr. Charles Hamilton's dad. That was his mentor, which I'm going to get into tomorrow. See, call myself. I got about 5, 6 of these different stories to tell that I've been researching, and they all get mixed in. So thank God I caught myself. But yeah, so his father, Mr. Marshall, fathers were school teachers. Mr. Marshall graduated from Lincoln University in the 1930s and applied to the University of Maryland Law School, where he was denied because it was segregated. So Mr. Marshall decided to go to Howard University Law School, where he graduated first in his class and met his mentor, who I just spoke about, Charles Hamilton Houston, who he enjoyed a lifelong friendship with. Now, in an interview published in 1992, yeah, they're jumping, in the American Bar Association Journal, Mr. Marshall wrote that Charlie Houston insisted that we be social engineers rather than lawyers, a mantra that Thurgood Marshall decided he was going to uphold and personify. Immediately after graduation, Mr. Marshall opened a law office in Baltimore, and in the 1930s, he represented the local NAACP chapter in a successful lawsuit that challenged the University of Maryland's law school over its segregationist policy. In 1936, Mr. Marshall became the NAACP's chief legal counsel. Fun fact, the first one was Mr. Houston, his mentor. After founding the NAACP Legal Defense Fund in 1940, Mr. Marshall became the key strategist in an effort to end segregation, and partly meticulously challenging Plessy versus Ferguson, the court-sanctioned legal document that called for separate but equal structures for Black and white people. Mr. Marshall won a series of decisions that gradually struck down that doctrine, ultimately leading to the Brown versus Board of Education, which he argued before the Supreme Court in 1952 and 1953, finally overturning the separate but equal doctrine and acknowledging that segregation greatly diminishes students' self-esteem and ability to learn. When asked by Justice Felix Frankfurt during the argument what Mr. Marshall meant by equal, Mr. Marshall replied, equal means getting the same thing at the same time in the same place. And this is a photograph of Mr. Marshall and his fellow co-chairs in front of the Supreme Court, celebrating as they had won that argument. Let's see. Thurgood Marshall constantly traveled to small, dusty, scorching courtrooms throughout the South. And at one point, he was overseeing as many as 450 cases simultaneously. This is a picture of Mr. Thurgood Marshall as he's arguing a court case. Mr. Marshall challenged white-only primary elections in Texas in addition to cases which the Supreme Court declared that restrictive covenants that barred Black people from buying or renting homes could not be enforced in state courts. In 1961, President Kennedy nominated Mr. Marshall to the U.S. Supreme Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit, in which he wrote 112 opinions, none of these which were overturned. And And this is Mr. Marshall in his justice robes. 4 years later, he was appointed by President Johnson to be a Solicitor General. And in 1967, President Johnson nominated him for the Supreme Court. And as I stated, he was confirmed to SCOTUS at a 69-11 vote. This is a picture of Thurgood Marshall in the Oval Office with LBJ, President Johnson. So in 1978, the Supreme Court case, Regents of the University of California versus Bake, Marshall was a part of the dissenting justices. So he had been sitting on the court by now for years, 11 years, and he dissented this affirmative action landmark case. He was not in agreement with affirmative action, stating that in the light of the sorry history of discrimination and its devastating impact on the lives of Negroes, bringing the Negro into the mainstream of American life should be a state interest of the highest order. To fail to do so, to ensure that America will forever be divided in society. Mr. Marshall died at the age of 84 on January 24th of heart failure in Bethesda, Maryland. That's going to be a theme I've seen. Not a fun fact, but a true fact. His mentor dies of the same thing, Mr. Houston. Now, what's crazy to me is like, I get why you want everything to be equal. I get it, you know. I get it. I'm just surprised that he wouldn't want, you know, because basically affirmative action was like, okay, based on what was considered discriminatory practices in the past, now we're going to use that as a litmus of, are you being inclusatory, or are you in the current political climate, are you including everyone in your selection criteria, and you're not just ignoring them? And we know that affirmative action is not equal in all means. They use people names to determine if they're Black, white, Hispanic, or Asian. There's a study by Harvard that stated that a Black sounding name would be less likely to get an interview than a white sounding name that admitted on their application that they were convicted felons. So was there a need there, especially in 1978, just like fresh off of segregation? And I know my mom, her school didn't even get integrated until the 70s. So I'm like, it's kind of naive of you to say that affirmative action is not needed when you fought all these cases. So it really is mind-blowing to me, but I do understand that he was coming from like, this is going to cause more segregation. This is going to cause more discrimination, because where we are right now, where persons think that DEI means that they weren't going to get a job, when that ain't even how it worked. And I'm talking for myself from hiring. Like, baby, you had to meet the initial criteria before you can even get an interview. So if you, and we don't even got time to look at names when I'm screening applications, or when I was screening applications, I didn't have time to look at names. I went straight to selection criteria. And if you were on there, great. Now, if you were on there, and this has happened before where I had like 8 persons selected, they all had master's degrees. So then I narrowed it down from those who had masters of anything to those who had masters of public health. So that we can do. But if you were like a veteran, then, because that's how I worked in Texas, nothing else, not a woman, not a Black woman, not a Hispanic woman, not even disabled persons, which they give in the federal government, or they used to anyways prior to 47 administration. Not even that. But if you were a veteran, even if you didn't have a master's of public health, I could not exclude you. But you had to have a master's degree, whether that was in education or sociology or even human resources or urban regional planning, nothing to do with infectious disease. Baby, I still have to interview. That's it for me, y'all. See you tomorrow. Bye.